Hey everyone, Mitchell Hora here with you. Excited for today's TopSoil webinar, carrying on some conversations that we had at this year's TopSoil Summit. The summit we have every summer down in Southeast Iowa, early part of June. And one of the key things we were talking about this year at the summit was, of course, carbon intensity, tax credits, but just emerging markets in general. A lot of times at Continuum Ag, we've been talking about corn and low carbon corn, low carbon ethanol. But there's a whole nother key piece of this equation too on the soybean side that a lot of times we don't dig into that much because we try to keep it, basic and focused on corn. But the soybean piece of the equation here is massive, and low carbon biofuels from soybeans has already been a huge deal for a long time. Nobody knows that better than Chevron and Chevron REG. So excited to have Paul join us here. Paul was at the TopSoil Summit, shared some great insight. We wanted to have him back by popular demand, I think they say, Paul. So back by popular demand to just dig a little bit deeper with us, continue to thank them for being part of the TopSoil Summit, and just have a little one-on-one conversation to dig a little bit deeper here. So Diana is running the slides. Diana, just kind of toggle through as you need. So Paul, before I kick it over to you, just real quick for anyone that's new to Continuum Ag, we're a software company based down in Washington, Iowa, really a farmer-facing company. We still focus on building soil health, but helping farmers really manage their data and quantify their carbon intensity. So quantifying and managing the data that then can be leveraged in these emerging markets to prove that on the farm we're actually doing a pretty good job. We can all continue to do better, but we got a real story to tell and folks to partner with to tackle some of these opportunities together. So today, like I said, we got Paul back. He's with Chevron. I'll let him introduce himself. We've got some of his slides that he shared at the TopSoil Summit. Maybe we'll bounce around, but a lot of opportunity just for Q&A. Paul, since June, there's a lot of updates that have happened as well with USDA, with I don't know how much we need to get into it from the jury side of things or the Supreme Court side of things, but Chevron was made some major headlines with Supreme Court, in a good, and what could end up being an interesting, maybe good way. And just lots happening as we get closer and closer to 45Z. So we're going to talk a lot about soybeans, of course, here today, but the current future state of biofuels, where this is going. In our last webinar, we talked a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. So Paul, interested in you guys' thoughts and perspective on that. But of course, it's, what should the farmers be doing here? And how do we, on the farm, how should we be thinking about this throughout the rest of this year? And then as we go into the future. Well, but with that, Paul, why don't I kick it over to you, introduce yourself. Thanks again for being here. Tee this up a little bit, but starting with, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role.
Yeah, thanks, Mitchell, for having me, and appreciate inviting me to be back on the podcast today. So, my name's Paul Nees. I grew up on a family farm in western Iowa and in Carroll County. So corn, soybeans, swine farm. And so a little bit of rolling hills out west. So we, my father's pretty involved in no-till farming for many, many years. He's also done cover crops and has actually been part of the Soil and Water Commission for the area as well. So been exposed to kind of the activities in the space for quite a while. So great to connect with this group and continue that conversation. I went to college at Iowa State University, got a degree in agricultural business, really kind of grown an interest in commodity markets, really the business side of farming, and really trying to figure out how to add more value to the crops and the products that are grown on Iowa farms. And so my career kind of took me into the soybean crushing industry. So I was involved in kind of soybean meal trading and logistics and risk management for CHS and for AGP. And then I took an opportunity to kind of move back closer to home and be closer to the family. And so went to work for West Central Co-op. West Central Co-op later on merged with FC Co-op to form Landis, as the name as they go by today. But at the time when I joined, it was West Central Co-op, and got involved in the animal nutrition side of the business. So the co-op owned a soybean crush plant there, was involved in the feed organization or the feed business, and had started in the biodiesel industry by taking some of the soybean oil from that crush plant into their own biodiesel plant. So that was my first exposure into biodiesel. And so that eventually turned into Renewable Energy Group, and I've been with the company now for over 18 years in different roles around feedstock purchasing, trading, logistics, risk management, and kind of origination, and have some back office activities as well that kind of fall under my responsibilities today. So it's been a really fun career. I guess I didn't really think this is a spot I was going to end up when I kind of got into this world, but it's been a really interesting adventure, and really enjoy kind of being in this renewable fuel space. It's been a really interesting time to be in this industry.
Well, and I think, maybe tell a little bit more on the story of Renewable Energy Group now with the partnership with Chevron, and kind of how that went about. And I think that kind of leads into what you were just getting at, that like, obviously you've seen this for a long time, and now major players like Chevron becoming involved in the biofuel side of things, not just, some of their traditional fuels that they've always dealt with. So maybe tell the story there a little bit on how that went down, and when was that? Has it been 4 years?
I can kind of give you the REG history lesson a little bit. So REG stands for Renewable Energy Group. We kind of trace our roots back to 1996 is when West Central first started making biodiesel from soybean oil in Ralston, Iowa. And so that was a part of the co-op as another, part of the animal nutrition division of the co-op. In 2006, there was a small group of us that spun out the biodiesel business as a separate standalone company. It was a private equity, private business. And we continue to grow the company through some, investments and acquisitions, and really grew the footprint to a much larger scale. In 2012, we had the opportunity to have an IPO, and so we were listed on the NASDAQ as REGI, and so we became a publicly traded company, which allowed us to continue our growth plan through that path. And again, continue to keep investing, growing the business. We acquired a couple plants in Germany, so we had a European presence as well. And it's been just over 2 years now that we were acquired by Chevron. And so 2022, I think from REG perspective, as a kind of legacy REG employee, we really saw, a more challenging margin environment upcoming. The benefit of aligning with a large oil company with the infrastructure, the downstream sales presence, the engineering capabilities, the strong balance sheet that Chevron would offer, as well as really kind of aligned goals on how to grow the business. I think so, Chevron's. Sorry, go ahead.
Help me better understand. Did REG also have crush plants, or is it just like the soybean oil refining? And maybe explain that process a little bit too. This is also part of why we've really had a lot of focus on corn at Continuum Ag, because it's the bushel of corn goes straight to the ethanol plant. Well, my understanding here, it's a bushel of soybeans doesn't go to the biodiesel refiner, goes to a crusher first, then the oil come back out. Maybe explain that process a little bit more. And then obviously that can tie into the refining process of that oil. I assume it's pretty similar to refining crude oil, and pretty much the same process and technology.
Yeah, so I'll try to touch on that. So we, as REG, we're not involved in soybean crush. We're not buying soybeans directly from farmers. At our location in Ralston, Iowa, the crush plant was located on the same property, right? But we were buying the soybean oil from Landis at that facility. Once we were acquired by Chevron also at the very close to the same time landed a joint venture with Bunge. And so Bunge is a multinational, soybean processor agribusiness, giant, right? And so in that joint venture, Chevron and Bunge jointly own two soybean crush plants, one in Cairo, Illinois, the southern tip of Illinois, and one in Destrehan, which is in the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana. And so through that partnership now, we have vertical integration into soybean crushing assets there and have access to the soybean oil that comes from those facilities.
That makes sense. Then you can take the soybean oil and maybe help reiterate again for folks that some of that soybean oil you can refine into biodiesel. And can you take the same soybean oil and refine it into renewable diesel if you wanted to? Or maybe explain the difference between the two of those.
Yeah. At a simple level, that soybean crushers buying soybeans from the farmer and producers from elevators, aggregators, they're going to process those soybeans and separate the soybean meal from the soybean oil. The meal is going to go into all the livestock feed applications. The soybean oil comes out as what we call a crude soybean oil. And so it's just been extracted from the soybean. And then it can go through several refining steps. The first step is to remove a lot of the water and gums from the oil, and that'll make it a crude degummed soybean oil. Basically, it's a centrifuge spinning out some of the impurities. And then to further refine it, you can go through refining, bleaching, and deodorizing, which are different steps to further remove the impurities, the color, and in some cases, the flavor from the soybean oil if it's going into food applications. And so as that oil goes through that refining process, it can go into applications that will make it into food products, or it can go into a biofuels application as well.
Yeah.
But in our case, for making biofuels, it's important for us to remove the impurities, the moistures to have an efficient biodiesel reaction or renewable diesel production process. So that can either happen at the soybean crusher or it can happen at the biodiesel or renewable diesel refinery. Both, you'll see both assets have the capability to do that.
Yeah. So in the I don't know a ton about the space, so asking some questions I don't know a lot about, right? But while we got you, that's the point, right? Because my questions probably somebody else's too. So in ethanol, it's a very biological process to take a bushel of corn and create a gallon of ethanol. But in this, it's taking that soybean oil, which was extracted mostly, that could be through a mechanical or a chemical process. My understanding, go from a bushel to a gallon of oil. But then this refining process is quite chemical, or is there some biological components to it as well?
Yeah, it's a chemical reaction to make it into biodiesel. Yeah. Essentially, you're going to add an alcohol. We use methanol, and introduce a catalyst to help speed up the reaction. And it's relatively low temperature and low pressure type of, low energy intensive type of reaction. But you're really turning that oil from a triglyceride, using fancy chemical terms, into a methyl ester just through the process of transesterification. That's true for biodiesel. On renewable diesel, it's a completely different process. We use hydrotreating type of process, which is more similar to what you see in a petroleum refining operation.
So, and that's then where like the renewable diesel is, my understanding of renewable diesel is it's just a drop-in fuel that's just ready to rock and roll, where biodiesel, you blend it with regular diesel and then it's ready to go.
Yeah, that's true, right? So biodiesel typically is blended either with petroleum diesel or can be blended with renewable diesel. We have customers that desire 100% renewable content, and we can give them a blend of renewable diesel and biodiesel. And one of the benefits that biodiesel offers is it's a natural lubricity additive. And so straight renewable diesel needs lubricity additive added to it because it doesn't have those naturally occurring in the fuel. And so biodiesel and renewable diesel make a really nice blend for customers that prefer a 100% renewable application.
Yeah, so then you got the renewable diesel and the biodiesel, blend those together versus biodiesel with a regular fossil diesel.
Correct. And there's plenty of, you see a lot of the renewable diesel, biodiesel blends happening on the West Coast, where you see higher incentives for that type of fuel.
Is that where most of the actual physical renewable diesel ends up? Is a lot of the physical renewable diesel ends up getting shipped out to the West Coast and actually burned there?
Yeah, if you look at the EIA data, the largest volume of renewable diesel ends up on the West Coast, primarily California. Washington and Oregon have increased their volumes in recent years with some of the state programs that they've added as well. You see biodiesel more uniformly spread across the rest of the country. Particularly, you see states that provide higher incentives for biodiesel consumption in places like Illinois, Minnesota, Iowa, Texas is where you'll see some of the larger volumes of biodiesel being consumed and blended.
Because like in Iowa, is the biodiesel incentive is like a tax credit that the blender or the retailer gets like a couple cent tax credit or something like that. Is that how they pass along some of the incentives at the state level?
That's correct. You see different forms of it. In the state of Iowa, there is a blender incentive, so they can reduce their tax burden by using their state tax burden by using biodiesel in certain blends. The state of Minnesota has a usage requirement, so it goes up to 20% in the summertime, lower in the wintertime. So there's different forms of state policy that help incentivize the use of biodiesel and renewable diesel in different regions.
And the renewable diesel piece, especially out west, that's really being driven by the low carbon fuel standards out there, the LCFS markets, which is that then incentivized differently, or it's kind of a mandate? Is it a blending mandate as well, like a percentage blend, or is
no?
it?
It's not a usage requirement. It's a requirement to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuels, and you can do that through a lot of different ways. Ethanol reduces the carbon intensity of gasoline. You see electric vehicles get credits, but for us, a lot of the credits are coming from biodiesel and renewable diesel. And so essentially what the program does is you generate credits by consuming fuel that is lower than the baseline carbon intensity that is set by the state. And you create deficits when you consume petroleum products that are higher than the baseline carbon intensity standard. And so then these credits trade at a value in the secondary market. So people that consume renewable diesel, biodiesel can generate these credits that are help the obligated parties fulfill their usage requirement.
Yeah, that's the trade type stuff, right?
Yep.
So it's my understanding, right? And a lot of folks on here are probably familiar with some of our conversation about 45Z, right? We're going to talk about that, but thinking out loud with you and brainstorming some of this. In 45Z, it's a federal carbon intensity number of 50 CI points, and then you've got to get below that 50 CI, and the lower you are, you can earn the tax credits, and then you can utilize those credits or resell them to somebody else that wants to lower their tax liability. Where in this, you're not generating a tax credit, but you're generating a credit or whatever, a carbon credit for lowering below that baseline number. Then you can trade or sell that credit to somebody else who's higher than that number. So then they qualify and don't get the penalties. I'm assuming it's more of a penalization type of structure. But it's my understanding that in California, they of course have their own GREET model, which is really important, I think, for everybody to know. So California has their own version of the GREET model, and the target, it's a moving target where every year you have to be below a slightly lower carbon intensity standard, where with 45Z, it's just going to be a flat 50, right? At least for the 3 years. Maybe it could lower in the future, but California, it lowers a little bit every year. So that kind of explain it the right way. That's like you're not generating a tax credit, you're avoiding penalty for having a poor score, but in avoiding that penalty, it creates a financial incentive to buy and trade these lower scores.
Yeah, you nailed it. You really essentially they're called LCFS credits, lower carbon fuel standard, and it's 1 ton of carbon reduction is what they trade in units wise, and so you can these credits trade a value. Regulated parties have to show compliance every year, and
Yep.
so they have to accumulate enough credits either through their own blending of renewable fuels and usage of lower carbon fuel practices, or they have to buy those credits from the marketplace to show their compliance every year.
Got it. Or they get a penalty, is essentially what it'd be, right? They get a fee, get a fine.
Yes,
So
and the penalties are high enough that people are going to comply with the law.
they're going to want to do it. You don't want the stick in California.
Yes.
Okay, so in California, also I saw there was a question come in. We are recording this. Diana's got it going. It'll be on our YouTube page and stuff like that. On the Continue Mag YouTube page, you can find all of our webinars and stuff on the Continue Mag YouTube page and on the TopSoil podcast. Okay, so now one of the things with these California markets, some of the stuff, it's my understanding that in some of their pathways to reduce the carbon intensity of the fuel, the on-farm practices aren't necessarily factored in, or they're not factored in they're definitely not at a field by field level. They use more general numbers and stuff. Maybe explain that piece a little bit on like, how do you lower the carbon intensity of the fuel going to California? And am I saying that accurate, that like how the bushels, or in your case, how the soybean oil and the soybean bushels were produced, that doesn't matter. It's not part of the equation today.
Yeah, you're correct. In the current rules, on-farm practices are not recognized as a way to lower the carbon intensity of the fuels, and so all biodiesel produced from soybean oil receives the same starting carbon intensity score.
Got it.
The ways that we could affect the carbon intensity of that fuel is our logistics, how we get the fuel to market, which we're pretty limited on how we can do that. But we've also done some pretty cool things at our plants. At our biodiesel facility in Albert Lea, Minnesota, we've put in a wind turbine, and so we can have lower carbon electricity to factor into our carbon intensity score for our fuel. And in Mason City, we just kicked off a project to Mason City, Iowa. We're building a solar farm, and so we can then apply for a lower carbon intensity score from the California Air Resource Board. They're the ones that govern this program, and that allows us to lower the carbon intensity of our fuels, which means we're allowed to generate more credits, which means the fuel that we sell is worth more in that marketplace.
Therefore, then somebody that could buy your fuel, it lowers their weighted average even more and generates even more credits that can be traded. So those are scope 2 reductions, right? So people that follow our stuff know, in this case, right, at the biodiesel or renewable diesel refinery, there's a scope 1 carbon footprint of what happens at the facility. There's a scope 2 carbon footprint from the energy, and that's what Paul's talking about. They're very much able to control that and investing to lower that scope 2 carbon emission. But since there's no pathway with the California Air Resources Board to lower the scope 3 carbon footprint, my current understanding is there even a way to have that conversation with them to even try to say, hey, we're using, more soybeans, that were grown with cover crops or whatever? Like, is there even a path for that right now, or is it just not even an option?
So I believe there is. You'll see that CARB, California Air Resource Board, will go through rulemaking sessions quite often, and they'll receive public input on, most importantly is what's the carbon intensity target for the fuels for the program. But there's all kinds of different rules that they have adopted and changed over the years that this program has been in place. And so I think there is potential for them to take up on-farm practices as
in a future rendition. But today
there's not. It would take a future change in rulemaking to do that.
That's what I was thinking. So that's why this 45Z thing has just been so groundbreaking, where it's like, now here's the first time where the on-farm practices are able to be included. And I think I'm in the same line with what you were just getting at, that now there's going to be some precedent being set as to how you can include a scope 3 reduction coming from the grain towards your overall CI reduction, that maybe then California and these other groups can kind of take a page out of that playbook to deploy it towards their efforts. Is that kind of what you're seeing happening?
I think you're right. You got to see it happen somewhere to believe it, right? And I think once you start to see this practice, obviously, when you get the 45Z rules out and everybody can see them, we can put this into practice, and then you can see an opportunity for this to spread to other areas as well. We've also seen some discussions at the state level outside of California. So places like I believe it's Illinois and Minnesota have considered different state programs, not passed into law yet, but there's been conversations at the State House about, are there ways they can incorporate on-farm practices into their biofuel programs as well. So it's not just a California thing. I think there's opportunities in other states to see this happen as well.
A lot of momentum picking up on that, right? And that's part of, as like at the TopSoil Summit, just with Continuum overall, just very bullish on the whole world moving more this direction, right? That we're kind of now getting the tools and the precedent being set as to how we can document our on-farm practices. We can quantify our on-farm carbon intensity. We can get it verified. We can track it through the supply chain. Like that's becoming more real. And now these programs can integrate it. And yeah, like you said, I saw that Illinois in some of their, I don't know if it's fully introduced yet, but at least in some of the draft language I saw, they were talking about using the actual Argon GREET feedstock calculator, the exact same one that we utilize at Continuum Ag today. We're talking about including that in as part of their LCFS market. And I'm sure, my understanding is that Canada would probably adopt some of that maybe earlier than California, maybe the European markets as well. Does Canada and Europe, do those kind of work the same way on the soybean, on the diesel side of things? I know that they have the programs on ethanol, but is the Canadian LCFS market or the European ISCC process, do those apply to biodiesel and renewable diesel as well?
It's my understanding that the Canadian program and the European programs give one standard score for soybean-based fuels, and so I don't believe there are any ways to get lower carbon credit or carbon scores or for individualized farming practices.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on that, but I believe that's the case.
No, I definitely know there's definitely not the on-farm side, but they at least account for you have the same type of opportunity as what you have in California. You have that in Canada or Europe, but obviously the prices are different and the mechanisms are different, and the hoops you got to jump through are of course always different as well.
Yes, there are. Canada is a significant customer for U.S. biodiesel and renewable diesel today. They also have a federal program as well as different provincial programs, which are similar to our state programs that kind of will stack on top of each other, and they all look a little bit different. So it is a very strong market for U.S. biodiesel and renewable diesel producers. We also see some of our fuel getting exported to Europe. Europe is ahead of the U.S. in terms of the adoption of biodiesel and renewable diesel. They've been doing it for a longer time. They have higher incentives, but we have the ability to export to some countries that are outside of the European Union. The European Union has import duties in place against U.S. biodiesel exports, and so places outside the EU could be markets for U.S. product as well.
Interesting. These guys they make me scratch my head sometimes, but that's a different conversation. So speak a little bit, I guess, on you've been in this space for a long time. A lot of the farmers, right? We're new to this whole CI and data stuff, right? Really just in the last 2 years since the Inflation Reduction Act passed, at least from my side, that I'm like, holy smokes, maybe there's something here. Maybe speak a little bit quick to over the last 18 years, how has this changed in terms of data collection that you guys have to do at the plant, the process and rigor, and the verifications or some of the stuff? Maybe speak to that a little bit on what you've seen, or how has that changed, or the process and rigor that you guys have to go through there.
It's changed a lot is the short answer. We have a compliance department that is dealing with all these sustainability programs across different states. across the federal programs, international programs, and it's great to have the incentives available in those different states for us to sell our fuel at the highest price market that we can get access to. But they're all complicated, and be able to access those markets isn't simple. And so I tease our sustainability person that he's got the most secure job in the company, because it's always changing. There's always new wrinkles to deal with, and it's so important to what we do. And we really wouldn't have a business without that. And so being able to track the carbon intensity of our fuels, the way that different states, countries measure it is all different. And so
Yeah.
being able to understand that and sell our fuel into the right markets, and be able to mass balance and kind of try to, we have the benefit at REG, Chevron REG, that we have a network of biodiesel plants, renewable diesel plants that use different types of feedstocks, and they're in different locations with different logistics modes. They have access to different markets. They have the ability to kind of mix and match a little bit, so we can kind of optimize our network and get our fuel to the best value that kind of optimizes the total return for the system, and not locked into just one or two different programs.
A little side thing on that is, all of your fuel and all of your carbon intensity scores like combined on a weighted average of Chevron REG's entire footprint, or does it stay kind of facility by facility, and they're batching and selling the fuel with its own CI score? Is it blended
It's
or?
It's facility by facility. Each facility has its own unique carbon intensity
Yeah.
factor based on the utility usage, and is it using electricity from coal, or is it using electricity from hydro, for example, or solar. So each facility has its own kind of carbon intensity calculation. And then to take that a step further, we have a biodiesel plant that might use some mix of used cooking oil, soybean oil, and beef tallow. And each of those fuels has different carbon intensity scores as well. And we can mass balance if you buy 100 gallons of each, you can sell 100 gallons of each. You don't do a weighted average of those three scores. You can sell those in different increments to different customers, the ones that will value it the most.
Yeah, you kind of keep them as batches, and yeah, you have enough that it's all blended together. You can't actually tell which fuel was from the beef tallow versus from the soybean oil, but you know how many basically certificates that you created that go along with the beef tallow fuel versus the soybean oil fuel.
That's correct.
Now let's switch into this 45Z thing, right? That's where, obviously, for the mass majority of like how we're talking about this and where I see it going and where Continuum fits in, is now there is becoming this opportunity to include where the soybeans came from, and the feed and the CI score associated with the soybeans, with the soybean oil. Maybe just tee up kind of high level. How are you guys thinking about 45Z? What's the current take on it? And just where are you guys at on it today?
Yeah, I think there's challenges to it, but there's really some opportunities. And I'd say overall we're excited about it, because I think the thing that we do really well is convert renewable feedstocks into fuels efficiently at a low cost, and get them to markets and sell them at a good value, right? And so we do really well in that space. And so we're always looking for ways to grow our supply of lower carbon feedstocks. And so if there are ways through climate smart ag that we can have access to soybean oil that we can convert into biodiesel or renewable diesel, that gives us the ability to unlock new markets and expand our pool of feedstocks, we think that's really exciting. Now, as you kind of said earlier, there is a supply chain that has to be managed. The farmer has to sell the soybeans to either to an elevator, to a crusher. They get crushed and sold to the biodiesel or renewable diesel producer. There's some handoffs there that have to be managed. And again, as we see the rules get written and understand that process better, I think there's real opportunities to do that, but that's not crystal clear yet on how that's all going to look. And so we're excited to be part of putting that process together. We want to be a part of that value chain, but we're not sure exactly how that's going to look yet.
But as you guys look at it today, like, you think that the juice is going to be at least worth the squeeze and at least be something there? Or do you think it's just like on the soybean side is just, I don't know if it's really going to work and might not be worth it? Or is it like overall, no, like this is probably going to work?
I think so. And I say that because the people in the value chain need to get compensated for what they do, right? Everybody that's providing extra work into segregation or processing or having to manage documentation, there's a cost to doing that. That somebody's got to be incentivized to want to do that. But it really is going to depend on the type of rules that we get from the Treasury. How much flexibility is going to be in the program? Is going to be what we saw with 45B, or are we going to kind of listen to some of the feedback from the industry on ways to make this more kind of, is it going to reflect what kind of real farming practices are and the ability for farmers to adopt, kind of mix and match different things? Or is it going to be, if it's going to be really rigid and require a lot of traceability documentation and not a lot of flexibility in the system, that's going to make it more hard to create value. And so we need to see that before we can really understand what the total potential value is.
For sure. And what you're getting at, right, is we still don't have the IRS rules about 45Z. I think all of our audience knows that. I still am in saying I don't think we'll even get the rules in calendar year 2024, but I hope I'm pleasantly surprised. But I'm just not holding my breath. But what you're getting at, I wholeheartedly agree. And Continue Mag just shared our response to the USDA's request for information. Interested in if you guys have any key hot takes that you're really pushing for, that this network can help to amplify, right? Our main push to USDA was, don't go with the bundle approach in 40B like what you were just referencing to, which is for soybeans, the only way you would qualify as climate smart is if you did no-till and cover crops. Now, I love no-till and cover crop on soybeans. We've been no-till and soybeans every year since 1986. We've been using cover crops on them extensively. Like a lot of farmers could do no-till and cover crops on soybeans, but it's still a small amount of adoption today. It'd be very limiting versus what we pushed for with USDA is use the actual GREET model. But the key, and at least how I run the numbers on the GREET model, in order to really lower your CI score on soybeans, you pretty much still got to be no-tilling and cover cropping. Those are by far the biggest drivers. Fertilizer changes and yield and some of these other things, they don't move the needle that much. Like in corn, you've got lots of different things that move the needle, like manure and just going to strip till and stuff. Like they can all help, but in soybeans, it's not as good. You don't have as many options, but nonetheless, we need to be using, at least in our opinion, we need to be using the GREET feedstock calculator, allow farmers to be innovative and not restrict this to only those two practices, allow farmers to be innovative and continue to fine tune as we go. That was definitely our key message. I think a lot of people, at least as I was reading the different groups and their response, that was a pretty resonating message, was use the GREET feedstock calculator. Don't go with the 40B bundle approach of the small set of practices. Let farmers be innovative. Is that in alignment with you guys, or do you have other key things that you're really wanting to see happen with 45Z as well?
You said it really well. I have nothing to add on how you kind of provided feedback in the existing kind of 45B, 45Z language. Yeah. The only thing I would add is, you touched on this at the summit, right? But we've been investing in cover crop seed development and that opportunity. And really from taking it further from not just the soil health benefits, but we're looking for opportunities for farmers to be able to grow cover crops in that kind of interperiod that they can harvest an oil seed on. And that would provide more oil available for us to provide to use as a renewable feedstock, right? And today, the way those rules are written, you're not allowed to harvest your cover crop, and at least in the 45B language, right? So that's additional feedback we had, is we want to see the opportunity for us to have a cover crop be a cash crop that still gets all the soil health benefits, but also provides additional revenue for the farmer, but also another path for providing low carbon feedstocks for the biodiesel and renewable diesel industry.
That's a really good point. And to be honest, I didn't even include that one in our feedback. And we have been harvesting our own cover crop for 6 years on our farm. So really important for my own family's operation. A lot of our customers too, we call it relay cropping, where we plant cereal rye. We plant the soybeans into that cereal rye like we do in our normal cover crop, but instead of terminating, we harvest the seed. And what you're referring to, I'm super bullish on, being those winter oilseed crops like pennycress and camelina and these winter oil seeds, I think is going to be huge, because as I look, at least in what your perspective on the future of these biofuels, to me looks just tremendous. And the question ends up being, where are we going to get all the feedstock from, especially as we look to HEFA going to sustainable aviation fuel. I love your thoughts and feed and perspective on all this. But we're going to have to get more creative and leverage these winter fallow periods to build soil health, but maybe harvest just the seed off of it at least, to continue to produce more with less, and meaning more crop, more fuel with the same amount of acres or less acres, as we continue to get more and more squeezed.
Completely agree. The biodiesel, renewable diesel industry has continued to always overproduce relative to what the EPA has expected from us, and generating more RINs than what the renewable volume obligation requires each year. And so, we are always having the conversation with legislators and regulators about how we can continue to grow the renewable volume obligation for all renewable fuels, because we think there's a lot of great benefits from the program. And the EPA's feedback pretty consistently has been, we're not concerned about your production capacity. We're not concerned about the demand for the fuels. The pushback pretty consistently has been, where is the renewable feedstock going to come from to grow the RVO? And if you look at our production in 2023, 2024, I think we've shown we can pull more renewable feedstocks into biodiesel and renewable diesel production. The EPA has underestimated the volume that we can deliver. But if you think about what we want to do going future, we need to have more renewable feedstocks to continue to grow this industry, right? And so it's an all of the above. We need soybeans, we need canola, we need animal fats, we need used cooking oil, we need cover crops, we need all those types of feedstocks, continue the RVO, and keep making that volume growth every year that we want to see.
That's super interesting. So and what you can add in, just interpreting right for everyone on. So EPA sets the renewable volume obligations of the renewable fuel standard, right? So you have RFS, but then the EPA implements it, right? Because their executive branch implements the law, and they've been saying, no, we're going to pull back on these obligations because they're worried about this food versus fuel argument would be their side. But what we started this whole thing with is that these soybeans are going to that crush plant for all the meal that's coming out of it. And then we also produce this oil that can now be refined, and we're getting feed and fuel on these same acres. And they're just not understanding that. Is that part of like the ongoing battle that we have to continue to have?
It is an ongoing battle, and you're right. And I think soybean oil, the U.S. soybean oil usage, roughly 45% of that goes into biodiesel and renewable diesel today. We've essentially reduced our exports to a pretty small number because we're getting more value from producing this stuff at home.
So we said 45% of total U.S. soybeans go into
soybean oil. Yeah, so 45% of U.S. soybean oil goes into biodiesel and renewable diesel production today. Yeah.
Of what total soybeans, but like
I have to double check that math, because obviously we still export a lot of whole soybeans, to China and other places. Yeah. I'm not I'd have to do the math because I don't know what the math will be on how much of the soybeans actually end up in biofuels, but it's still very significant. It's a large number, but I'm not going to try to guess on what that number is.
I need to do some more looking into that, right? Because like in corn, it's kind of rule of thumb, about a third to ethanol, a third to feed, a third to export, right? And obviously that export piece being pulled back. So I wondered if it was about the same, but pretty much a mass majority of the soybeans would have to go to crush, I assume. Because
if it's not exported, it's going to crush. So there's very few. I mean, obviously there's some kept back for seed and some other small industrial applications, but it's either crushed or exported as soybeans. So it's a large number.
Of that oil, 45% of it used for fuels. What would be the other 55%, or some of the main uses of that soybean oil?
It's going to go into different type of food applications mostly.
That's what I was thinking. Vegetable oil type of purpose. Yeah, cool. Like already I looked at the clock a little bit ago, like, holy smokes. This is what always happens to me. I get way too deep into stuff and having fun and trying to get all my questions answered. I think we have, yeah. So somebody that's anonymous here, but what's your renewable diesel or biodiesel growth goal per year? Or any I mean, you were talking about obviously I see the RVOs continue to increase, but how does Chevron try to plan for that? Because my understanding, at least looking for the outside in, that those RVOs don't come out in time for what you need and
Mhm.
super unpredictable for what's going to happen. So, how do you guys think about setting goals and growth, and how do you prepare? And it does this 45Z thing change the equation?
Yeah, I think the 45Z is important. The renewable volume obligation helps kind of set the size of the market demand. Um, we haven't talked about other policy things like the blender's tax credit and the clean fuel production credit, but essentially that's a credit that the federal government gives for producing biodiesel and renewable diesel. And the change for next year means starting in January 2025, that's only going to qualify for domestically produced gallons, will not be eligible for imports, which it is today. And so we think that's going to reduce the import volumes coming into the United States, which gives the opportunity for domestic producers to expand production. Um, so we think there's plenty, and I think if you look around at all these large companies that are making public statements around trying to reduce their carbon intensity of their products, there's only so many ways to do that. And we think we offer a pretty competitive alternative for fuel, for energy, in
Sure.
companies that are dependent on diesel fuel. There's only there's limited ways to abate that. You know, electrical engines aren't going to be the solution for some of these hard to abate sectors like mining and the rail industry, marine, things like that. So we think we offer a really competitive solution that companies are going to ask for. And so we think the growth is there, definitely on the demand side. We are a leader in this industry. We want to maintain a leader position. And so we intend to keep growing our production to match what the industry is
Yeah.
demanding from us.
Not big time. It really interesting, yeah, on the that blender's credit only being for domestic feedstocks, and yeah, the potential impact that's going to have on local demand. It's my understanding too. Is it within that blender's credit, or is that part of the clean fuel production credit, where part of that credit ends up being based on the CI versus just a flat blender's credit? Does that start in 2025 here as well, or maybe?
Yeah.
You know,
The current credit, the blender's tax credit, is just $1 per gallon for all biodiesel, renewable diesel, regardless of the carbon intensity and domestic or international imports.
right,
Starting on Jan 1, the clean fuels production credit will be for domestic only, domestically produced fuels only, and the value of the credit will adjust depending on the carbon intensity of your fuel.
right.
So again, you're seeing another program that's differentiating for lower carbon fuels and give an additional value for fuels that have a lower carbon impact.
Interesting. How are you guys? Maybe I'll get to the other question real quick too. That was in there. Good one on like some of these other oil feedstocks and stuff. Any hot take on timeline of some of these things, or how? Like, when do you think that any hot take on like when we are going to see more opportunity for a lot of the farmers that are on the call to be looking at producing some of these winter oilseed crops?
Well, it's happening now. It's a matter of scale and timing. And what we saw is a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing, right? We didn't see people want to invest into crush facilities when the seed wasn't available, and we didn't see producers want to invest in growing seed if there's not demand for that market. So I mentioned our partnership with Bunge earlier. We recently made an announcement at our Destrehan, Louisiana facility. We're going to make a large investment to increase our crush capacity there, and that capacity will have the ability to process cover crops. And so we're making that investment here. And so we expect that things like winter canola and covercress and camelina are going to be growing. These things take some time for farmer adoption, to get all the supply chains in place, to get the genetics that are suitable for different growing regions. That process takes some time, but we think that we'll start seeing. We've already processed some of that oil in some small batches. to get to commercial volumes. It's going to take a few years, but that process is underway right now.
Yeah, we've played with winter camelina on our farm for 2 years, and year one I was definitely less than impressed. Here this past year, it looks a lot more promising. We've had it in blends, right? We've never done it as a standalone crop on its own, but trying it, and knowing that, again, bullish that it's gonna be coming, and I think it's a big opportunity for our farm. What else? What's your maybe more of your message to some of the farmers that are listening to this? What should we be thinking about, whether it be for this year's crop or as we look at next year or the years to come? What is your message, right now as you're talking with your partners in the crush facility and what they should be telling to their farmers, and how should we be thinking about this, I guess, going forward?
Yeah, I think we've always had a really good connection to the ag community, and I think just advocacy is really a big one, right? The farmer voice is really important. We're going to a political season here again, and I think making sure that farmers and lawmakers and regulators understand the importance of renewable fuels and how much it impacts their operations. Being able to speak up for that, I think, is something I think we all could do a better job of telling our story and how important that is for the future of our industry, because we are, at the end of the day, it's a very policy dependent industry. And so if we don't have strength from our legislators, from the grassroots people, it's gonna be hard to grow this thing and support the farm economy the way that we have the potential to do. And I think the 45Z and the CFPC and all these policy things are all pointing towards lower carbon. Everything is coming, right? And so I think farming really has a unique opportunity to take advantage of that in ways that we haven't been able to in the past. So looking for ways to incorporate cover crops in the right way, cash cover crops that might not have been considered before. I think we're looking for ways to collaborate and really understand how to do this, because we don't have all the answers on how to unlock this value. We have to make sure that whatever policies are being developed, and then as it gets turned into rules and then turned into the farming practices, then how we turn this into money, it's going to take different views at the table to make that happen. Because if we just say, hey, this is what we want to do, and it doesn't have buy-in from producers and farmers, it's not going to go anywhere. And so we have to think together about how we can find value.
With the Chevron and REG side coming together, right? I think we're seeing a lot more of a pull of traditional fossil fuel with renewable fuels really coming together to say, hey, we've got to work together to make sure that this can all work out the way that we want it to. And seeing more and more of those partnerships just continue to come about, it seems. And with the policy stuff, I think some of this is working too. We had our Iowa Senator Joni Ernst put in her letter to U.S. Treasury 2 weeks ago or something like that. 50 some signatures, good bipartisan support. And they were pushing for, don't bundle this, use the GREET model, get us some rules fairly quickly. Again, like I shared, I hope Joni's voice is good and loud there, and they do listen and get some rules out early. But I'm not holding my breath. But at least it feels like they are understanding, right? And at least my understanding of 45Z and these policies is pretty good bipartisan support as well. That no matter what ends up happening in November, good bipartisan support. As long as the rules get written in a decent manner that enables farmer innovation, and they don't screw something up like with indirect land use change or something like that. It looks like we're going to be sitting in a pretty awesome spot.
Yeah, I agree. We've had tremendous support from specifically our Iowa legislators. Right, that's what we call home here. And Senator Grassley has been the biofuels champion as long as he's been there. Joni Ernst has done some awesome things. Even on the House side, Randy Feenstra and Miller Meeks and Nunn, they've all been fantastic on our issues. There's just always another battle to fight. So we appreciate all the support that they've given us, but we know there's always just another battle around the corner that we're going to need their continued support on.
It's an ongoing thing. It's been really interesting to me, right? Coming from not being in this space 2 years ago to now really having to figure it all out. Yeah, it's just a constant ongoing lot of misinformation, lot of just ongoing battle that has to be had. And now it just continues to get even more and more complicated too. And looking at this bigger picture of the on-farm impacts and scoring and all this kind of stuff. But we're like out of time already, which is crazy. I feel like this has been like 20 minutes. Hopefully it's been good for everyone else. Any final parting kind of thoughts? Final take from your side, Paul.
Well, thanks again for having me, Mitchell, and appreciate the opportunity to talk in front of your group at the summit again. So want to continue that partnership, always open for a conversation, but I really do get excited about the potential opportunities around connecting agriculture. I'm a farm kid, right? I really think this, what we're doing is important, and partnerships like these matter in this space that's still developing. So look forward to continuing to work with you and your team on this space.
Love that, and huge to have people like you that are fighting for it too, right? That you actually understand how the farm economy side is going to work, and that farmer mentality, right? Really important, and a missing voice a lot of the time. So great that you've got that perspective in these rooms where these conversations are being had. It's awesome. So yeah, looking forward to keeping in touch and continuing to keep fighting this fight together, because I think it's a huge opportunity, and it's going to be here for the rest of our careers, and stuff ain't going away. But all right. Anyway, well, thanks everyone for hanging out and spending the time here. I think I've learned a heck of a lot in this conversation. Hopefully you guys have too. Thanks, Diana, for putting this up here. We got another webinar coming up with Dana Jackson from RSM, one of the big CPA firms, right? That's going to be actually creating these 45Z tax credits, writing the opinion letters. They work with dozens of ethanol plants. Dana was at the TopSoil Summit as well, and she is a champ when it comes to the nitty gritty of these tax credits. So really going to be digging into that and continuing to make sure that our farmers are ready to rock and roll. Also, of course, more Q&A every Tuesday morning at 7:45. So I think I've got a guest each of the next couple of weeks. We'll have some guests. So be sure to join in Tuesday mornings and check out all of our stuff on all the socials and website and all that. But until next time, Paul, appreciate the time once again. Thanks everyone for hanging out. Have a good rest of your day.